Hello, and welcome to Suitcase Coder, the podcast. My name is Laura, and I'm the host of this awesome podcast where I share my journey from joining a coding bootcamp all the way to becoming a freelance web developer. My goal in life has always been to travel the world, and I think I've finally found the career that will allow me to do so. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on this week's episode. Yesterday, I had my very first interview that I've had actually this year. I kind of stopped applying for a couple months just because of some things that came up. I'm outside of the country. So yesterday I had an interview for a startup in France, which I was actually quite excited about. I mean, if I were to get a job in France, I would surely go. But anyway, that's besides the point. I started the technical interview with what was supposedly the easy question. And the first question that I got hit with was the egg problem. Now, if you haven't heard of the egg problem, apparently it's an infamous programming interview question, and it begins like this. So there's a building, it's 100 stories high, and you have two eggs. Both eggs are identical. How do you determine which floor the egg, which, how do you determine the first floor that the egg will break on if you drop it from the. So with your two identical eggs, tell me how you know which floor the eggs will break on. In my mind, obviously, it will break on the first floor. If it doesn't, it's a miracle, but the second one surely will. But that's not what they're looking for. They're trying to figure out some kind of logic to see your thinking for this kind of question. Long story short, if you know the egg problem, please explain it to me. And if you don't, the answer is 13.56 or 65, something like that. So you're supposed to say, like, throw the first egg from the 14th floor, and that will give you the least amount of tries to figure out what's the first floor the eggs will drop on. Anyway, besides the point. So that's kind of what I've been up to this week. I was studying for that for the first half of the week, and then I had the interview. And then for the second question, I'm going to use that as my weekly challenge for this week, because part of this podcast is to always continue learning and learn from my mistakes. So anyway, we'll get to that when we get to that. If you're tuning in for the first time, let me quickly recap last week where I talk about the decision to quit your job or leave what you're currently doing and make a career switch into the tech field. But basically, that's kind of like the first step. At least that's where I started off. I was an administrative assistant. I wasn't liking it. I wanted to make the switch. And those are just kind of the steps that I took to decide to make that switch. And so kind of to follow along with that, today's episode, I wanted to talk about, so you've made the decision, you're interested in coding, and now you're trying to decide whether you should either go back to university or start and get a computer science degree, join a coding bootcamp, which they are popping up everywhere. I'm talking about everywhere, like globally, online, in person, around the corner, they're everywhere, which is not a complaint. And then the last option is to teach yourself. So today I want to discuss the things to consider before or to help you make the decision between those three choices. If there's a fourth option, let me know. Those are the kind of the three obvious ones, and the three that get asked the most, I would say, is computer science degree at a university, coding bootcamp, or just teach yourself. So the four things I want to cover within this episode is one, finances, which I have mentioned before and I will continue to mention. Two is timeline. What are your goals as far as time goes? And then also just like how much time do you even have to complete the task of becoming a developer? Three is learning how you learn, which is huge. And I don't think high schools or schools in general, at least in the States, talk about this enough, is that everybody has a different learning style and most schools just kind of teach one way. I don't think it's something that teachers or education really focuses on. But if you have the chance and you're about to go through a do-over and you get to go learn something new from scratch all over again, take the time and learn how you learn. Believe me, it'll help you a ton. And coding isn't the easiest thing in the world, so learning how to learn is going to help you immensely. And the fourth thing I'm going to cover will be your end goals. So obviously, knowing why you're going to choose between a boot camp, a computer science degree, or teaching yourself, I think is really important and will help you narrow down your options when deciding between the three. Let me jump straight into the first thing, which is finances. And I think I mentioned this last time. The Financial Diet is a YouTube channel, blog, website that really opens up the conversation about money and finances and having it be an open topic. And that's something that I've learned even in the past year and a half, especially with making the switch, is in order to be able to make these changes, you need money. And knowing what your finances are before getting started is going to help you now, but also in the future. Because if you can't necessarily afford a boot camp and you have a decent job, maybe take maybe it will take you longer, but stay at your job, keep earning that money that you need, and sacrifice your evening time and spend it on coding. If you are thinking of going to college, think of that financial baggage that it will carry. Do you have the funds for it? Are you okay or willing to take out a loan if you need it? These are things that you have to consider, especially thinking of the fact that these career changes take time. So sometimes you're not going to find a job immediately after graduating either a computer science degree or a boot camp. Sometimes it takes a couple months to a year to find a job. So are you able to support yourself financially during that time? So again, I like to highly emphasize the importance of knowing your finances before you get started, and giving yourself either a budget or just being in the know is super crucial. So talking about the three options, I think it's quite obvious that the most expensive will be a traditional four-year college or university, at least within the United States. You have to pay tuition, you have to pay for books, you have to pay for housing, you have to pay for food. There's a lot of extra costs that come with going to college, going from most expensive to cheapest. So your next option is bootcamp. They vary in prices, and one thing to consider is like what you get for your money. So maybe one's a little bit more expensive, but with it you get career support after you graduate, you get mentorship throughout your program, you get maybe curriculum for life. That's a lot like the bootcamp that I went to. So it was a bit more expensive, but everything that they offered, I think, was part of the plan, and it paid off, at least for me financially. And the cheapest one, of course, would be to teach yourself. There are so many free resources to teach yourself to code online that I don't think you need to spend more than $500, and that's even a ton. I will definitely link up some resources below. There's Free Code Camp, which I've talked about before. There's meetups that you can attend. There's JavaScript practices. There's a ton of things that you can do to teach yourself. And then the best thing, I think the cheapest out of that, is to make friends and get involved in the tech community, whether it's online or in your local city, and just ask for help whenever you get stuck. I mean, that's honestly the best thing you could do. And even if you decided to go the boot camp or the university route, networking and having people within that industry that can help you out is a tremendous help. And if you do decide to teach yourself and you have maybe a little bit like extra money, you can also pay for courses online that are much shorter and much more detail oriented. Let's say you're stuck on building APIs. You can buy a course for as cheap as $20 and focus solely on that. And that way you can pay for only the things that you know that you need. So yes, finances. That is so crucial, and I will continue to talk about it, and I will continue to praise the Financial Diet for opening up my mind and seeing that it's okay to talk about money, and it's actually kind of empowering to talk about money and to just be financially aware. Actually, before we get to the second point, I'm going to go have some lunch. I will see you very soon. This random break in the middle of this episode is brought to you by the fact that I found a cat in the place where I was recording and went to go grab lunch. So excuse the pause, but we will return in 3, 2, 1. The second thing that I think is important to address is definitely your timeline. It's quite obvious that a computer science degree, if you take the traditional route in the United States, it ends up being about 4 years. And that includes not only like applicable coding courses where you're in front of a computer coding, but also theory. Usually you have to take math, electives, and just other courses that a university requires in order for you to graduate as a computer science major. Another thing that I heard from the very beginning when I was considering, and I actually considered going back to school for computer science and decided it wasn't the best option. But one thing that I heard that stuck with me was that within a 4 year university computer science degree, you actually only spend about one semester, so about 4 to 6 months, in front of a computer coding and learning applicable skills that you're going to use in like an everyday job as a developer, software engineer, whatever you want to call it. So if you think about it, then out of the 4 years, and you're only taking one semester to learn what's applicable, that ends up being about the same amount of time that a boot camp takes. And within a boot camp, you can choose different ones between like 1 month, 4 months, 6 months, whatever. There's different options that you can look into, but they're definitely shorter than 4 years. And you're learning the newest technology, and you can kind of choose which technologies you want to learn. So there's definitely different languages, and that's like a debate that everybody continues to have. So there's JavaScript, there's Java, there's PHP, there's all of these different languages, and then frameworks as well, and libraries that you could learn in different boot camps. And the choice is yours. And I think that's something that's also good about choosing a boot camp is kind of seeing, and this will tie into the fourth point, which is kind of knowing what kind of job you want and then working backwards from there and seeing what languages you want to learn. So as far as timeline goes, so with a computer science degree, you will have 4 years of knowledge beyond just applicable skills, but it takes 4 years, possibly more, depending on how you learn. A boot camp can take as little as a couple weeks and as long as about a year, but usually, at least I haven't seen a boot camp that goes beyond a 1 year timeline. Yeah, so timeline is something that you can think about what you have time for and what your goals are. Do you want to be a developer now, or do you want to be a developer eventually in the future? Third option, of course, is to self-teach, and this will kind of go into the third point, which it depends on your learning style. But as far as timeline goes with self-teaching, there's different routes going about it. Like you can spend months learning the theory or like trying to figure out what to learn before you actually learn it, and you can learn it as like quickly as a couple weeks and get an internship, or it might take you 2 years because the inevitable imposter syndrome hits, and then you never feel ready or you never feel like a real developer, and so you never actually make it into the career. So that just really depends, and it goes into the third point, which is your learning style and knowing the best way that you learn. So about the third point is knowing what your learning style is, and then making sure that you know how to best absorb new information, because learning to code is a lot of work, and it's a lot of nuances, and it's a lot of new vocabulary, and it's a lot of like trial and error. And so if you're someone that knows what kind of learning style works best for you, I think that'll make your choice a lot easier. So let's say I know I don't work exceptionally well in classrooms, because then I end up comparing myself to other students, and if I'm not doing as good as them, or if I'm like way ahead, I either feel frustrated that I'm not as good, or I feel like I'm getting held back because we're waiting on other students to kind of catch up. So classrooms usually don't work for me. Self-teaching requires, I think, a lot of self-motivation and knowing how to learn, because if you're going to be the one teaching yourself, you have to know how you're going to, first of all, motivate yourself to learn, and then second of all, know how it will stick so that you can actually become a developer. As far as coding boot camps go, it's structured enough to where you don't have to spend any time figuring out what to learn, which I really like. And same goes for CS degree, like you learn what you have to learn. But with bootcamp, I feel like it gives you a little bit more flexibility on the way you learn and the different projects that you work on. So if you want to like take some time before the bootcamp and prep and get to know the vocabulary before getting into it, which is something that I did and it really helped me out. I think that's key. And there's a lot of resources out there to know if you're like a visual learner, an audio learner. That's another thing. Computer science degrees a lot of times is in a classroom and it's just sitting there and listening to the professor speak a whole bunch. And I really don't learn that way at all. Like in one ear, out the other. So yeah, so just know your learning style, and I'll try to find some resources and link those below so you can find like which learning style works best for you and have that ready before you begin the journey. And the fourth thing that I wanted to cover was definitely knowing what your end goals are. So maybe you want to actually become a like true computer scientist, and you want to know more about the theory, and you want to go into academics, in which by all means I think computer science would be the best way to go. If you're just curious about that and you want to get a role as a developer, I think either self-teach, get an internship, or join a bootcamp might be a better option, because you can gain the applicable skills you need in order to land a job, and then take your free time, and you can always keep learning, right? So you can always like pick up a book or attend meetups or do whatever you need to read about things that you're passionate about. So know your end goal. Know if your goal is to become a developer. If it's to become a developer, maybe at a specific company, and maybe that company requires computer science degrees, well, then you know what to do. If you want to work at startups, maybe they're a little bit more open to having you learn on the job, in which case you can self-teach and take advantage of the time within that company and kind of learn as you go. Figure out what your end goal is, as far as like career wise, and like what you want to accomplish out of your switch into the tech world. Consider that before making any decision, and see like which one lines up best with your values. So to recap this episode, you're definitely thinking about making the switch into the tech world and you're not sure which to choose. I would say take a day, take a couple hours to yourself and figure out these four things: your finances, your timeline, your learning style, as well as your end goals, and work backwards from there. Figure out your end goals and then work backwards. See what learning style you have. Look at your finances. What can you afford? What can't you afford? As far as like money and time goes. And honestly, like ask around. Get on LinkedIn. Get on different Slack channels. Go to networking events. Ask different people and see what their options are, and maybe like their experiences can help you decide as well. So that's basically the end of this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. And oh, no, as far as action items and weekly challenges, which I've promised you. So my action item for this week is, like I said, to take the hour and figure out these four things: your finances, your timeline, your learning style, as well as your end goals. The coding challenge this week, which is the same coding challenge I got in my interview yesterday, was given a string, return the letter appears most frequently consecutively. So as an example, let's say you have a string that's A, B, 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 C, A, C, B. What you want to return is B, because the letter B appears most often repeatedly after each other. So yeah, that's my coding challenge. If you want to find more about that, visit my website at www.suitcasecoder.com. And if you want to watch the recordings of this episode, head over to my YouTube channel. You can also find me at Suitcase Coder. One last thing I forgot to mention is to check out my friend's podcast, Tech Talent Talk, where he interviews different students who have attended coding boot camps, university programs, and have taught themselves. And so his entire podcast is a little bit more in depth in figuring out the differences in those and getting people's personal experiences in the matter. So if you're interested in hearing that, head over to his podcast at Tech Talent Talk, and it can be found also on anchor.fm or Spotify or whatever streaming service you listen to. One last thing, always feel free to reach out, leave comments here, check out my YouTube channel or my website at www.suitcasecoder.com.